Good evening, I'm Joe Fryer, coming to you from NBC News headquarters in New York. Here are some of the stories we're following now tonight. Fallout continues. We've learned today that 2 more Memphis police officers were relieved of duty after the brutal beating of Tyre Nichols. And now the fire department has terminated 3 employees, including 2 EMTs who responded to the scene, all while protests continue in several cities across the country. An ice storm hits the South, bringing freezing rain from Texas to parts of the Tennessee Valley. And we're remembering the life and career of Cindy Williams, best known as one half of Laverne and Shirley. Also tonight, on the heels of Holocaust Remembrance Day, we'll sit down with survivors and examine their impact on Germany's younger generation.
If you've never spoken to a Holocaust survivor before, it changes your perspective.
And imagine falling 200 feet off an icy cliff and living to tell the tale.
We're back in nature on an incline. How does it feel?
Oh, it's just amazing, amazing.
We come on air tonight with major developments out of Memphis, where the fallout is growing in the Tyre Nichols case. The Memphis Fire Department has now fired 2 EMTs and a lieutenant, saying they violated numerous policies and protocols when they were called to the scene on January 7th after Nichols had been beaten and pepper sprayed. Those terminations were confirmed late today by the fire chief, who released a letter which says the EMTs failed to conduct an adequate patient assessment of Nichols. Also today, the Memphis Police Department revealed that in all 7 officers were relieved of duty on January 8th. The 5 officers who were charged in Nichols' death, plus 2 more who have not been charged. Protesters are taking to the streets again tonight, renewing calls for police reform and demanding justice for Tyre. This was Chicago just moments ago, where many gathered at Federal Plaza, making their voices heard. That follows the largely peaceful protests that took place over the weekend across the country from coast to coast: New York City, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Boston, and more. Right now, let's go to Memphis and NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson, who has the very latest on these major developments, Priscilla, both from the police and the fire department. So let's kind of break it down, start with the police. What do we know about these 2 officers who we now know were relieved of duty earlier this month, and how is Nichols' family reacting to all this?
Right, Joe. Those 2 officers were placed on administrative leave. They have not been fired, and the department says the reason why their names were not originally released was because the investigation is still ongoing, and again, because they have not been fired. And while the department has declined to say the identity of one of those officers, we now know the identity of the other officer who was relieved of duty. His name is Preston Hemphill. He is a 5-year veteran of the force, and we are learning that on his body cam, you can see that he was one of the officers who tried to pin Nichols down during that initial altercation, and authorities say that he also used his taser. Now, today, the attorneys for Tyre Nichols' family are coming out very strongly, saying they are disappointed that these revelations are just now coming to light, saying in a statement, quote, "It certainly begs the question why the white officer involved in this brutal attack was shielded and protected from the public eye, and to date from sufficient discipline and accountability." Now, Hemphill's attorney says that his client has been fully cooperative and points out that he was only involved in the initial confrontation and not the second, more violent part of that encounter. Joe?
Yeah, and that attorney saying that those 4 videos that were released by Memphis police on Friday, one of those was Officer Hemphill's body camera video. Let's talk about the fire department developments today. What are we learning about these EMTs who were fired?
Yeah, so we knew that several fire department personnel had been placed on leave, but we hadn't gotten any details up until this point about who they were or what they had done. And we now have the names of these personnel who were fired: 2 EMTs, Robert Long and Jamichael Sandridge, and 1 Lieutenant, Michelle Whitaker. All 3 of them responded to the scene. And we're learning that when those 2 EMTs arrived, police told them that Tyre Nichols had been pepper sprayed, and they checked him for that. But the fire department says that they failed to do an adequate assessment of the patient and some of his other injuries. And we're also learning from the statement that was released that the lieutenant never even got out of the fire truck. And so the fire department again saying that all three of these people have been fired, saying that they violated numerous MFD policies and protocols. Joe.
Priscilla, just overall, what is the mood like on the ground right now there in Memphis? And how is Nichols' family preparing for the funeral, which is going to take place in just a little over 24 hours on Wednesday?
Yeah, Joe, there are a mix of emotions here on the ground. On one hand, there is anger that this has happened again and that a person has been killed at the hands of police. And we've seen that spilling out into the streets with these protests. But as I speak to people here, yes, there is anger and there is hurt, but there's also some relief that these officers have been charged, that it appears that there will be accountability in this case, although people are still holding out to see how this will actually play out in the criminal justice system. But many people are saying that there needs to be far more than just that. There needs to be systemic change in these police departments, and that the culture of policing overall needs to change. And at the same time as people are feeling all of those emotions, there's, of course, also grief. A man has lost his life here. Tyre Nichols, a father, a son, someone who loved to skateboard and just watch the sunset. And now his parents and this community are preparing to honor his life on Wednesday at his funeral, when he will be laid to rest. The Reverend Al Sharpton expected to deliver the eulogy, and Attorney Ben Crump expected to deliver a call to action as the community works to move forward and figure out what comes next. Joe?
We're looking at live pictures right now of the memorial that is happening, of the protest happening right now in Memphis. Priscilla Thompson, appreciate your reporting throughout the day here on NBC News Now. Thank you so much. Joining me now to discuss this further is former NYPD detective and the director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance, Mark Claxton. Mark, good to have you with us. First and foremost, let's talk about these developments here late today. The fire department terminating 3 employees, the police confirming now that 2 additional officers were, as they say, relieved of duty right after this interaction with Tyre Nichols. What's your reaction to these developments, and what do you think we could see in the coming days?
I apologize. I think in spite of the rapid pace, the relative rapid pace, at least with this investigation initiating and the rapid decisions made by the police department as far as terminating some of the police officers, in spite of that, this is a very complex investigation that's going to occur. And we can fully expect that there'll be other revelations and a lot of additional information to come out. There will quite possibly be additional personnel either in the police department or sheriffs or the fire department that will also have some involvement in this investigation, and we'll find out some more details and facts about this too. So I don't want people to get the impression that we have all the information that's available. Undoubtedly, there is a lot more information as we move forward.
We are seeing renewed calls over the last several days for police reform from the streets of Memphis to President Biden and Congress, including a GOP congressman out today calling for that. Still, we know federal changes are an uphill battle. So in your mind, what does it mean? Does it mean it falls on local leaders? And what are some of the changes you think realistically can be made moving forward?
The most immediate changes in as far as what is referred to as police reform are going to occur on a local level. So, yeah, the local municipalities, local governments can enact some significant and substantive changes if they choose to do so, because we've already seen that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has failed. So federal legislation does not appear to be on the horizon. And so any significant or substantive changes to how police operate in these communities is going to have to happen in some ways on a local level. And some jurisdictions have begun that. Some jurisdictions have already established that, for example, low-level vehicle violations will not be within the purview of their police agencies. And I think that's a reasonable and responsible move, along with utilizing current technology to limit the amount of interactions that police are going to have with civilian population.
And Mark, the 5 officers charged in Nichols' death, they are all black officers. A Washington Post article notes that 58% of the Memphis Police Department is black in a city where 64% of the population is black. And while officers of color are less likely to use force than their white counterparts, analysts say the improvement is marginal. One expert's quoted in the article saying, diversifying law enforcement is certainly not going to solve this problem. Do you agree?
I think we haven't had the necessary discussion really and dive deep into the dynamic of race, the role that race played in this particular case. I mean, just consider this. This is something that is unprecedented. You have a black victim, which is common, unfortunately, but you have black offender police officers as well. And then you have a black chief of the police department. So further on down the line, I think there'll be adequate time to really analyze the particular role that race plays. Undoubtedly, as is the case always, race plays a role in law enforcement on every level. And moving forward, I think those discussions will be helpful. One thing for sure, regardless of the race of the police officers, this is a situation where we've seen the danger and the destruction caused by a toxic police culture, which subsumes all of the cultures, dominates all of the colors and social beliefs, and really causes these tragedies to occur with all too frequent regularity.
All right, Mark Claxton, former NYPD detective and director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance. Thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
We're following breaking news in Lakeland, Florida. Police say 10 people were shot in a drive-by shooting this afternoon. 2 victims are in critical condition. Police provided an update as we came on the air.
We think that the individuals in the car shot at and shot who they wanted to shoot. It was an intentional act. It certainly wasn't a random, just a drive-by shooting. And like I say, things like this just don't happen in Lakeland, but today it did, this evening it did, which is disappointing.
Police say there were as many as 4 gunmen who opened fire on both sides of the street. They're looking for a blue Nissan with temporary tags. Again, 10 people shot in Lakeland, Florida, 2 in critical condition. There have been no arrests. Tonight, about 50 million people in the South are under winter alert as a massive storm barrels east. Freezing rain and sleet froze parts of Oklahoma today. That system now heading toward Tennessee. Now, this wintry mix won't create those massive snow drifts, but getting around in icy conditions is where it can get dangerous, especially in the South. That's happening in North Texas. Slick roads have led to accidents around the city of Denton. This storm has already canceled around 865 flights nationwide. More than 100 are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, hundreds of schools, including universities, are canceling classes too. Joining us now from Fort Worth, Texas, is NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky. Morgan, first of all, what are the conditions like where you are?
Yeah, Joe, they are getting worse as we speak. We've seen temperatures plummet throughout the afternoon here in Fort Worth, dipping below 30 degrees here just about an hour ago. And with it has come a mix of snow flurries, sleet, and freezing rain. As you mentioned, it's not going to be the snow that's the big concern here, but an ice buildup that's only expected to get worse over the next 48 hours or so as this temperature remains below freezing. In the Fort Worth area alone, we have heard reports of about 100 injury-related accidents that happened on area roadways caused by those slick, icy roads. Upwards of a half-inch of ice expected in some of the more rural areas in North Texas, and that's why officials are warning everyone, stay off these roads if you can. There's no reason to be out, and hard to believe, it was about 2 years ago, just behind me, Joe, where there was a more than 100-car pileup from, you guessed it, freezing rain. Here we are yet again, and that's why those warnings are going out tonight. Joe?
You know, Morgan, one of the reasons we're focused on Texas is because of what happened 2 years ago. Massive freeze took over the entire state. It knocked out power. I mean, ultimately, more than 200 people died. There were a lot of questions asked in the wake of that. How is power looking for the state now?
That is a significant question. Governor Greg Abbott addressed it over the weekend. I want you to hear what he had to say in his own words when pressed about the reliability of the state's power grid. Take a listen.
We are working this session, however, to ensure that we will be adding even more power to the grid in years going forward. But the grid is in great condition, just like it weathered the cold snap before Christmas. We will be able to weather the cold snap next week.
So that is encouraging news. Of course, every Texan will tell you that Mother Nature is going to do, whatever is in store. We don't necessarily know, and so that's why everyone's hoping that the grid remains intact. The bigger concern here, Joe, is going to be those local outages. If that ice builds up on power lines, that could cause significant issues. Couple that with sub-freezing temps, and some people could be in some incredibly uncomfortable territory. However, there are warming centers that have opened up across the North Texas area to help anyone in need. Joe?
All right, NBC's Morgan Chesky in Fort Worth. Stay safe, my friend. Thank you. Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns with the forecast. Bill, ice storms are no fun no matter where you live, but especially in the south. I mean, how intense is this one going to be?
They're difficult to forecast, too, because sometimes you get the freezing rain, which is like the worst of the worst, and then sometimes you get the sleet, and the sleet is slippery to drive in, and you can slip and fall, but it doesn't knock your power out. So there's a big differential between sleet and freezing rain. So the ingredients that you need to have this all happen, you need Arctic air, and you need a little shallow layer of air right down at the surface. That's why it's not snow, because above that, it's warm enough that it's melting the snowflakes into the raindrops or freezing it into sleet. So we have the cold air in place. Everywhere in the light pink colors, that's where we have wind chill advisories. Even currently, -25 in Fargo. This morning, it was a lot worse. I mean, we had wind chills that were -40. So it's cold in Sioux City, Des Moines, Chicago's at -4. You know, it actually feels like winter for once in many areas of the Midwest. 7 is the wind chill there. And all this cold air is sinking all the way down to the south. Now, there is one thing a lot of people are going to be talking about towards the end of this week, and this is a little piece of Arctic air that's going to be coming into the Northeast. And these aren't misprints. This will easily be the coldest since Christmas, and in some areas, coldest that we've seen since last winter. But when you see Burlington at -17 with a wind chill of -39, that's cold stuff. And that's not even at the high elevation. So anywhere in the mountainous areas of ski resorts, Saturday's going to be like dangerous cold with those wind chills, especially early in the day. New York City dropping to 8 degrees, wind chill and -7. Notice the cold air, not that penetrating to the south. I mean, Philadelphia and D.C., it's going to be cold, but not like New England cold as we go into Saturday. By the time we get to Sunday, it's short-lived, too. It is in and it is out. I mean, it's not going to be warm on Sunday, but the wind chills improves dramatically in most of these areas. So now let's get to the ice storm. So the cold air is in place. We already have some light drizzle. So this isn't like a big storm. This is like 3 little storms in a row. But when the temperatures in Fort Smith is like 30, 31 degrees, and you have freezing drizzle, and if you do that enough times in a row, it builds up on the branches break, and then you get the power outages out of this. Notice Dallas is at 28, 29 degrees. You've had some sleet, and you've also had some freezing rain. So here's our alert map. The one that has the best chance of power outages is when you get in the ice storm warning. These don't happen that often, but Memphis to Little Rock is in the ice storm warnings. Dallas, you're under a winter storm warning, along with Austin, Texas. Doesn't happen all that often. Even San Antonio is under a winter weather advisory. So on this map, the mixture of the sleet and freezing rain shows in the pink. So this is as we head through this evening. Then tomorrow morning, a lot of freezing rain and sleet mixed here from Austin to Dallas. So tomorrow morning's commute, I'm sure a lot of schools will be canceled. The roads will be treacherous, and then this mess tomorrow afternoon, evening heads up to Little Rock to Memphis. This will be when we start to possibly get some power outages out of this, and then the last batch in this 3-day event will be as we go into Wednesday. So here's the ice forecast. When you get to a 1/4 inch, that's the rule. 1/4 inch is when you start to break branches. That's anywhere in the blue from Memphis to Little Rock, and Joe, also from Dallas to Abilene, San Angelo. So we'll see how this all plays out. We got 3 days to watch this.
All right, NBC's Bill Cairns. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Now, if you're planning a big vacation, perhaps to escape this wintry mess, and you're hoping to use those airline points to fly for free, you might want to book soon. Frequent flyer points are getting harder to use, and many airlines are raising the bar to achieve elite status. NBC's Tom Costello has more on the price you pay.
It can make a big difference if you travel a lot or hope to. The more you fly one airline and use their credit card, the higher your airline status. More points, more perks. Free checked bags, lounge access, TSA pre-check, seat upgrades, and free flights. But after lowering the requirements for passengers to achieve elite status during the pandemic, some airlines are now raising the requirements back to pre-pandemic levels.
To attain lower tiers of status, you don't have to fly as much, but if you want to get into those super elite platinum tiers where you're treated like royalty, you really need to be a road warrior.
Or spend heavily. Take Delta Airlines. To achieve gold medallion status for 2024, Delta is raising the required amount of qualifying dollars from $6,000 to $8,000 with Delta or its credit cards. It's also limiting access to its lounge. Last year, American Airlines went to an all-points system. United is also reinstating pre-pandemic elite requirements, a combination of flights, purchases, or both to gain status. Southwest will require more points for a companion pass ticket. With planes nearly full, TSA pre-check lines are getting longer, and you may struggle to use a free ticket during the big seasonal travel periods.
When it comes to earning versus burning, earning is easy. You can earn miles without even flying. But burning, redeeming, that's the tough part. There simply aren't enough seats.
NBC's Tom Costello reporting. After the break, we are turning back to the South. What we learned on day 6 of the Murdaugh murder trial, including a closer look at shell casings found at the scene. That's just ahead. The double murder trial for a powerful disbarred attorney in South Carolina is now in its second week. The focus today was on guns found in one of Alec Murdaugh's homes. He's charged with murdering his wife and son. NBC's Blaine Alexander has the latest.
Well, today we saw day 6 of testimony. Remember, this is the case that is bringing the attention of the nation all to the town of Walterboro, South Carolina. At the center of it all, Alec Murdaugh, a once famed lawyer, a prominent member of a prominent legal family there. He's now been disbarred, he's disgraced, and he is on trial for the murder of his adult son and his wife. Today, we saw 2 different law enforcement agents take the stand, one facing cross-examination from the defense, the other showing body camera video. And in a kind of unusual moment in court, we actually saw him revealing gun after gun that was taken from the property of Alec Murdaugh. It's his hunting lodge, but he presented them in court under questioning from prosecution. Now, this is something that led to a kind of back and forth between defense, repeatedly objecting to this, saying that ballistics had already shown that those were not the weapons used involved with the murder. However, the prosecution says that it was important to admit them into evidence. But back to the first testimony from the law enforcement official, that's when we heard defense really kind of trying to poke holes in the initial investigation, at time questioning the number of law enforcement officials who had walked through the crime scene, but in another interesting exchange, asking if the fact that there were 2 different guns used in this crime could have also meant that there were 2 different shooters. Take a look.
One explanation of this data would be 2 shooters. One explanation, not the, but one.
Not the only one.
Yeah, not the only one, but it is a reasonable explanation, just like one shooter running up that way, correct?
Sure.
Now, the prosecution pushed back on that theory, saying that it could also mean that there was one shooter using 2 different guns. Court, of course, has adjourned for the evening. It will resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. Back to you.
Blaine Alexander. Blaine, thank you so much. The principal of the Virginia elementary school where a 6-year-old shot his teacher is no longer on the job. She has been removed as principal, but is still working for the school system. Today, students were back at that school for the first time since the shooting, which critically injured a first-grade teacher. The school has made changes, including permanent security officers, metal detectors, and clear backpacks for all the kids. NBC's Katie Beck has more.
Students returned to the classrooms today at Rich Neck Elementary School, where the school has been shut down for 3 weeks after a 6-year-old student brought a gun to school and shot his first-grade teacher. Today, increased security at the school, including police officers, metal detectors, and new protocols, such as having the students carry clear backpacks within the school. The first graders that actually witnessed that terrifying event were moved to a new classroom that was painted by the community and decorated with items from their previous classroom to provide a sense of security. Parents dropping off students today said they felt anxious initially about this return to school, but are feeling some hope and some encouragement in seeing the administrative changes that have happened over the past few weeks. We know that the Newport News School Board has removed the superintendent. We also know that the principal and assistant principal here at Rich Neck Elementary School are no longer in their positions. Parents say that's just the type of culture change they want to see, as well as the added security. They hope things will change moving forward. Here's what parents had to say.
I think it'll help all the schools in the city of Newport News.
You said you don't love the idea of seeing the metal detectors, but if they work, you're all for them.
Yeah, they should be unnecessary, but if we need them, we need them. I'm very okay with the administrative changes because I just feel like they're not doing their job if they're not protecting everybody.
Joe, the Newport News Police Department says their investigation continues into possible criminal charges in this case. They say they hope to have things wrapped up within the next 2 weeks. As for the parents of that 6-year-old boy, they say their son suffers from an acute disability, and they say they continue to pray for the full recovery of Abigail Zwerner. Joe?
Katie back. Katie, thank you so much. After the break, more of the top stories we're following this hour, including a search in Oregon for a man accused of attempted murder, why police are now keeping a close eye on dating apps. Plus, if COVID, RSV, and the flu aren't enough, well, we're going to tell you about valley fever and what to look out for. And states along the Colorado River have a very big decision to make, but if they can't figure it out, well, then the government is going to step in. We'll explain when we come back. Time now for some of the big headlines that we are watching tonight. Prosecutors say the charges in the fatal Rust shooting against Alec Baldwin and the film's armorer will be formally filed tomorrow. The two will face involuntary manslaughter charges over the fatal shooting of the film's cinematographer back in 2021. TikTok's CEO will be testifying before Congress. Xiaozi Chu will appear in March for the first time to answer questions about the app's security and its ties to China. The Chinese-owned social media app is facing scrutiny after media reports showed possible security breaches. Invitations are out for President Biden's State of the Union address next week. One of the invitees is Brandon Say. He's the man who disarmed the suspected Monterey Park gunman after the suspect had killed 11 people and wounded at least 9 in another location. Also today, Tyre Nichols' parents accepted an invitation to the State of the Union from the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Lisa Loring, the actress best known for playing the original Wednesday Addams, died Saturday of a stroke, according to her daughter. Loring played the young Wednesday from 1964 to 66. She was 64 years old. And get ready for it. The Super Bowl is around the corner, and we've got the Kansas City Chiefs facing off against the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a game that is already historic. It will feature 2 black starting quarterbacks, the Chiefs' Patrick Mahomes and Eagles' Jalen Hurts. It is the first time that has happened in Super Bowl history. Police in Oregon are looking for a man accused of torturing a woman and say he could be using dating apps to target new victims. 36-year-old Benjamin Foster has been on the run for almost a week now. The manhunt started last Tuesday when officers found the victim tied up and unconscious. She is still in the hospital in critical condition. Now, police believe the suspect is actively using dating apps, not only to potentially find new victims, but to help him evade police. NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin joins us now. So, Dana, what do we know about the suspect and this terrifying information they're putting out there about the potential that he's using dating apps?
Yeah, Joe, good evening. Investigators have not revealed exactly how they know he is still using dating apps, but they feel it was important to let the public know. Benjamin Foster is wanted for attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. Police have found the suspect's car and believe he still may be in Southern Oregon. Foster has a record of similar assaults, including a 2019 case in Nevada, where, according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Foster was arrested for holding his then-girlfriend captive for 2 weeks and beating her. And Joe, the details so gruesome, including breaking her ribs and burning her with lye.
So, Dana, there was a development last week. A woman linked to Foster was arrested last Thursday. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, so police say Foster likely received help fleeing the area from the 68-year-old woman. Her name is Tina Marie Jones. And at this time, it's unclear what her relationship is to Foster. You can see her photo right here. She was arrested and booked for hindering prosecution. And Joe, a $2,500 reward is being offered for information that leads to Foster.
And last we heard, the victim was still in the hospital. Do we know how she's doing?
So the latest update from police was that she is still in critical condition. And, you know, it's been nearly a week since investigators found her. So no telling, Joe, how long she has been in this just awful, horrific state.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Dana Griffin, thank you for your reporting. Appreciate it. Actress Cindy Williams has passed away at age 75. That is according to her family. The beloved actress was probably best known for her role on the popular sitcom Laverne and Shirley. It was a Happy Days spinoff, which ran from 1976 to 1983. In a statement, her family says they're, quote, so proud of her for many things. Her lifelong mission to rescue animals, her prolific artistry, her faith, and most of all, her ability to make the world laugh. May that laughter continue in everyone, because she would want that. In honor of her memory, the Hollywood Walk of Fame says flowers will be placed on Williams' star tomorrow. 40 million people in the U.S. rely on the Colorado River for water, but because of climate change, drought, and a growing population, there's just not enough to go around. Emails obtained by the Associated Press show that states along the river are at odds over how to share the water supply. And if they don't figure it out by tomorrow, well, the federal government is going to step in. NBC's Hallie Jackson has more.
Stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California, the Colorado River gives fresh water to people across 7 states. But drought, climate change, and a growing population has shrunk the river's water flow to its lowest levels ever. Now, states that rely on the river have until Tuesday to figure out how to share the limited water supply. If they don't, the federal government will step in to do it for them. This all started back in 1922 when the Colorado River Compact was signed, dividing the river's water use by something called acre feet. What is that? It's how much water you need to cover an acre of land in a foot of water. The upper basin states, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, were supposed to share something like 7.5 million of those acre feet of water every year. And the lower basin states, California, Nevada, Arizona, allotted about 8.5 million per year. Mexico, where the river meets the sea, got 1.5 million. Okay, fine. So a lot of numbers, but here's what you need to know. The math worked as long as the river provided about 17 million acre feet a year. But that number has been going down, and fast. In the last 3 years, the river's water levels are so low that those original allocations are impossible. The states that are affected have been trying to figure out what the new math should be themselves, but so far, no luck. Everybody's got a reason, too. The upper basin states say, hey, they've already cut about half their allotment. Nevada says they've cut their usage by about a third. Arizona, which receives the least amount of water from the river, says more people and agreements with Native American tribes prevent them from making any cuts at all. And California, which gets the most amount of water from the river, points to its big agricultural industry as one reason why they can't cut back either. Without a simple solution and with a water crisis growing, the federal government now set to step in and force these states to cut back quite a bit.
All right, Hallie Jackson, thank you. These days, if you're feeling under the weather, it can be hard to diagnose some of those common symptoms. Your cough, fever, tiredness, headache, or chills, well, they could be COVID or RSV or the flu. Now, all of that is stressful enough. Now you may want to add one more to the list, valley fever. It's a fungal infection, and doctors are concerned about its likelihood to spread. NBC's Gotti Schwartz has more.
24-year-old Devin Buckley's freshman year of college was supposed to be the time of his life.
Life was great, actually. At the time I got sick, I had no complaints.
But in spring of 2018, the University of Arizona student suddenly started losing weight. He was extremely tired, struggling even to walk to the bathroom. It took 6 weeks to get a diagnosis, a fungal infection called valley fever.
Had you ever heard of valley fever?
No, I had never heard of it.
Valley fever is caused by breathing in microscopic spores that live in dirt.
It sounds like you were extremely close to death.
Yeah, they were telling my mom to prepare for that.
He's still not better, spending 5 years in and out of the hospital. At his worst, he was on life support for 2 weeks.
At 23, you have your whole life ahead of you. This is an exciting time. And he's just hoping to have a day where he's not in pain all day. So it's a challenge.
Some people with valley fever experience just mild disease, but 5 to 10% of cases lead to serious long-term lung problems. The disease can spread to the brain, joints, and in some cases is fatal.
The spores that cause valley fever thrive in dry desert environments like this. 2/3 of all cases reported in the United States originate from right here in Arizona, and researchers say that the disease's reach is expanding.
In recent years, valley fever cases rose 32%, and experts worry it could get much worse. One study shows the spores that cause it could spread beyond the Southwest through the Great Plains as the earth warms due to climate change. And while there is no cure for valley fever, researchers say they are close to developing a vaccine.
It's been found repeatedly.
Dr. John Galgiani has been treating and studying valley fever for 40 years.
If we could prevent this with a vaccine, that would be a real game changer.
Researchers at the University of Arizona have created a vaccine for dogs that could be approved by the USDA early next year. It would be the first fungal vaccine approved in the U.S. for animal or human. Dr. Galgiani says it looks promising for people, too.
How hopeful are you that we're going to see a vaccine soon?
I'm really quite hopeful. In my view, right now, we do have a candidate that deserves to be evaluated, and I think will probably be effective, and we'll be using it.
And he says time is of the essence. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Tucson.
Thank you, Gotti. President Biden announced a $4 billion boost for a Baltimore tunnel that's not only been around since Reconstruction, but is still in use today. And that seems to be the problem. The Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel is Amtrak's biggest source of delays between Washington and New Jersey. Well, today, as part of his $1 trillion infrastructure plan, the president promised that the new federal dollars will fund a new tunnel with construction slated for earlier this year.
The structure is deteriorating, the roof is leaking, the floor is sinking. This is the United States of America, for God's sake. For too long, we've talked about asserting America's leadership and building the best economy in the world. Well, we have to have the best economy in the world, you have to have the best infrastructure in the world. That's not hyperbole, it's a fact.
Today's event was the first of two in as many days to highlight the benefits of the president's infrastructure law. The president is hoping to boost his approval rating, but a new NBC News poll shows that Americans are as concerned about his mishandling of classified documents as they are with former President Trump. NBC's Steve Kornacki joined us now with the big board with a closer look at what the poll tells us. Hey there, Steve.
Well, it's a new year, Joe, and there's Republicans in charge of the House now instead of Democrats. But the political climate, our new NBC News poll shows, really hasn't changed much since 2022. Here's the president. He remains unpopular. Just a 45% approval rating for Joe Biden. Those are the kinds of numbers we were finding all last year in the run-up to the midterm election. Something else we were finding all last year, economic insecurity and pessimism. Asking folks in this poll, how is your income compared to the cost of living? And look at this. 2/3 of respondents say they feel like they are falling behind. That issue of inflation loomed large last year, continues to loom large in voters' minds heading into this year. You could also take a look at this. Look at this big list here. We asked about a whole range of traits and attributes and basically said, do you have a positive or negative sense about Joe Biden when it comes to these things? And you can see, look at all the red ink on here. These are areas where he's upside down. He's not getting the numbers he wants. He does well on that question of, is he easygoing and likable? But how about like honest and trustworthy? Negative rating there. Competent and effective. Negative rating there. Mental, physical health. Negative rating there. So the story of 2022, we saw Joe Biden unpopular, economic insecurity was high, all of these issues voters have with Biden, and yet Democrats had, as you may remember, a pretty good midterm, all things considered, in 2022. They gained a Senate seat, and they almost held on to the House. And why was that, despite all this, all these bad poll numbers for them? Well, here's something else that we saw in 2022, and we're seeing again now. Even though Biden's unpopular, even though his party is unpopular, Republicans are even less popular, and Donald Trump is even more unpopular than Joe Biden. And that's what saved Democrats in the midterm election in 2022. It wasn't that Biden and Democrats were beloved by voters. It's that there was a choice that many voters perceived between two things that they didn't like, and there was one they didn't like more than the other. That's what propped Democrats up in the midterms, and Democrats are hoping that could prop them up in 2024 potentially, and it is a big question, I think, for the months ahead. Is the Republican Party still the party of Donald Trump? Will he be their standard bearer in 2024? One thing we asked in our poll, Republicans, do you consider yourself more a supporter of Trump or a supporter of the Republican Party. A third of Republicans still say they are mainly a supporter of Donald Trump. And then here's a broader question about Trumpism. We asked Republicans, do you consider yourself a supporter and part of the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again? 2/3 of Republicans said yes, they consider themselves to be part of that. So that was the dynamic in 2022. It was an unpopular Democratic Party and Joe Biden against an even more unpopular Republican Party and Donald Trump. Will that be the dynamic heading into 2024? A lot to be flushed out over these next few months, but that's the key question.
Steve Kornacki will help us flush it all out. Steve, thank you so much. After the break, teaching younger generations. We're going to show you how Holocaust survivors are educating young students from Germany. Now Tonight continues next. Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated by Soviet forces on January 27, 1945. 78 years later, the date is internationally recognized as Holocaust Remembrance Day, meant to honor millions of victims and survivors around the world. Last week, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff visited Auschwitz on the anniversary of its liberation, and he spoke with MSNBC's Joe Scarborough about the importance of Holocaust commemoration.
We have to educate people on what the Holocaust is, what it meant, what anti-Semitism is. It's this banality of evil that they talk about. And we have to push back on it. That's why I always say we can't normalize it. Anytime we hear it, we've got to call it out.
And one way to educate younger generations is through honest conversations with the people who actually lived through the tragedy. NBC's Maura Barrett sat in on a conversation between Holocaust survivors and young German students.
On the ground floor of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, survivors George and Gary are joined by Carlo and Sarah, two interns from the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, an organization that matches German volunteers with Jewish communities across the U.S. with the goal of spreading Holocaust education and forging a path to reconciliation.
Reconciliation and not compensation, because you can't compensate for killing people, but you can try to reconcile with the people that you oppressed.
In partnership with CJE Senior Life, Sarah and Carlo meet with Holocaust survivors every few weeks. Today is their first time meeting George and Gary.
If you've never spoken to a Holocaust survivor before, it changes your perspective.
It's so amazing that we have the opportunity to listen to those speeches and the reports on the atrocities and the discrimination they had to suffer.
The survivors immediately had questions.
Your parents, your grandparents, have they ever mentioned anything about the era of Hitler era?
My grandfather, I did talk to him about his father. His father was always a conservative, but that does not make him innocent, because he was a bystander, and with that he enabled the Holocaust, right? If you don't speak up about it, you enable it. My great-grandfather on my maternal side, he joined the NSDAP in 1929. He sat in the Reichstag from 1933 to 1945.
He was part of the Reichstag?
Yeah, from 1933 until the end.
He was very prominent. So.
I guess, yeah. I don't feel any connection to him. I just feel disgusted by that person.
My grandparents never talked with their children, with my parents, but I feel like we have a bigger distance to the Holocaust. So now we talk about it and we learn more. So every time I call home, I also talk about the speeches I listen to every day about the Holocaust survivors, because we meet Holocaust survivors on a daily basis.
This is such a unique opportunity for one generation to get to speak to another generation. Do you have any specific questions for them?
Did you hesitate to visit Germany, or?
It was not easy to meet a foreigner. I didn't want my children to speak German. I don't blame Hitler for everything. Hitler was a beast, of course. He was a very bad person, of course. But Holocaust is not only Hitler. But still, something is there. Some aftertaste is still there. I cannot fight it.
I liked the time I spent in Germany before I came to America. And I really have no complaints with people I came to contact with. But it was a different situation. I was a young man looking for action, if you will, and the girls I met, they were very nice.
I mean, what do you make of the fact that German young students now are so interested in making sure that they have the right story and are sharing the right version of history while also acknowledging their country's role in it?
I think it's very beneficial. Will it solve the problem of anti-Semitism? No. But every little bit helps.
It's, of course, mandatory to teach about the Holocaust in Germany. But here you learn so many more things. There's still so many untold stories, and yeah, that's what I will also like bring back to Germany.
Do you feel hope for the future in that, or how do you feel about that?
To be honest, probably not. Anti-Semitism existed for thousands and thousands of years, but I don't know if it's going to change the minds of a lot of people.
May I give you a little hope?
A little hope.
The UNESCO, so the Education Department of the UN, they have shown time and time again that if you educate enough, anti-Semitism will go down.
Wow.
So they've shown that that's the most important weapon. What we're doing here is really important, and I'm really thankful that you guys are here. The older generation and working with the younger generation, I feel like won't be an easy road, but if we take it together, we can eradicate anti-Semitism in the 21st century.
Our thanks to Maura for that important conversation. What was nearly a tragedy became a miracle. An experienced hiker shares her near-death experience. It's coming up after the break.
You hiked those 150 feet?
I had hiked those 150 feet
with a broken neck?
Yeah, well, I was trying to hold it like this.
A Colorado woman says she is counting her blessings after falling 200 feet off a mountain in California and living to tell the tale. NBC's Steve Patterson has her story of survival.
The scenic beauty of California's San Gabriel Mountains conceals a hidden peril in plain sight: ice. And no one understands more than Ruth Warnecki.
To being out here again and walking in such a short amount of time is just extremely exciting.
The 40-year-old accomplished hiker says slippery terrain is nothing she isn't used to. So on Christmas Eve, she headed to the top of Cucamonga Peak, but on the way down, the wrong step of a lifetime.
For her to be alive I'd say that's a miracle.
Rescue workers say Ruth slipped and tumbled 200 feet, breaking her neck in 2 places.
With those types of falls over the last few years, they are usually fatalities.
Not Ruth. She doesn't even remember the fall. Instead, she woke up surrounded by a group of Good Samaritans, one sending a GPS locator to rescuers, another wrapping her up with the coat off her back.
I am just deeply, deeply grateful.
But that wasn't the tough part. High winds prevented the rescue chopper from reaching her location, so through indescribable pain and the possibility of permanent waist-down paralysis, Ruth had to complete the hardest hike of her life to reach a clearing for the rescue chopper.
You hiked those 150 feet?
I had hiked those 150
with
feet
a broken neck?
Yeah, well, I was trying to hold it like this.
Now, Ruth is on the long road to recovery, but despite the odds, she's walking it, guided by her faith.
To what I was saying about prayer, Jesus, now help me, be with me. And he brought me that sense of hope and comfort.
And it got you through.
Got me through.
The miracle on the mountain. Steve Patterson, NBC News.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Ruth. Before we go, here are your 60 seconds of joy. Hundreds of dogs and dozens of mushing teams gathered in my home state of Minnesota this weekend for the biggest sled dog race in the lower 48. It's called the John Bear Grease Sled Dog Marathon. Competing teams are now a couple days into the trek. They're expected to wrap up the 300-mile journey by tomorrow night. Now, tonight, the Moon and Mars will meet in the sky for an event known as an occultation. It is essentially an eclipse where the Moon will pass in front of Mars from the perspective of Earth, but it's only visible for a small swath of the planet. So if you aren't in the lucky sweet spot, LA's Griffith Observatory is live streaming the event starting at 11 p.m. Eastern. Speaking of sweet spot, a DC ice cream shop is earning quite the reputation for paying it forward. Charles Foreman owns Everyday Sunday and frequently gives scoops away to those in need. Last May, his customers decided to start doing the same. What began as one $100 donation quickly became tradition. Customers are now known to leave envelopes of cash donations or simply buy cones for others in line. It's a chain of giving that has led to hundreds of donated scoops and, of course, countless smiles, many of which have chunks of Rocky Road stuck somewhere in their teeth. That does it for us. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night. Until then, I'm Joe Fryer for Now Tonight. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.